Okay, good morning, friends. Welcome you again in the entire lecture series. So, this is the fourth unit we are discussing today, fuels and lubricants. First of all, we need to see what are the fuels. Okay, so the fuels are the material or the substances which generally contain hydrocarbons. Carbon and hydrogens are present here. It means these fuels are the materials which produces heat, large amount of heat on combustion. It means whenever we are talking about fuels, the combustion process is required or it is associated. If there is no combustion of that particular fuel, it means combustion. First of all, we'll see what it means by combustion. Combustion is the burning in presence of oxygen or air, that we call it as combustion. If there is no combustion process, then what may be possible? And still, if the material is fuel, that may be nuclear fuel. That there is no combustion reaction. There is just nuclear reactions are there, and there can be that can also be called as fuel. But mainly here, in this particular topic, we are related to fuels which are undergoing the combustion process. Okay, so the fuel is any material which is producing heat on combustion, and generally it contains carbon and hydrogen. If you see the main reaction, fuel components, it means whether hydrogen, carbon, and etc., that are reacting with oxygen and that are forming some combustion products, and the heat is liberated. It means some amount of heat is liberated here. Okay, so these materials can also can be called as fuels. So in our syllabus, as a fundamental or we can say primary part, we have to see types of fuels. There are two types of fuels. One is primary and other is secondary. The primary fuels are also called as natural fuels, and secondary fuels are also called as derived fuels. So the primary and secondary are natural and derived are the two types of fuels. All these fuels can be classified into three subtypes as solid, liquid, and gaseous, and they are also solid, liquid, and gaseous state based on their nature. Now we have to see the examples, and this will be very easy type of question, because in examination some easy questions are also to be asked and some difficult questions are also to be asked. So this is very easy type of question. Now I would like to ask you that if the solid fuels are there, natural solid fuels, you have to tell me some of the examples for natural solid fuels. Tell me some of the examples for natural solid fuels. Wood, peat, and some forms of coal. Okay, as coal or lignite we can say. Then in case of liquid fuels, so we are talking about natural, and that are crude oil and vegetable oils. Okay, so the natural gaseous fuels are natural gases. It means you must remember this, because these are going to be asked in examination, that what are the natural liquid fuels or what are the natural solid fuels, or digest is, it was suppose wood is a digest type of fuel or coal is digest type of fuel. In this way, some questions may be asked. So these are now the secondary fuels, the derived fuels, in which these are process fuels or the secondary fuels. In solid state, coke and charcoal. Coke is a form of coal and charcoal. These can be the examples. In liquid fuels, you know that petrol, diesel, kerosene, naphtha, tar. Okay, these can be the various fuels which can be in the liquid type of subcategory. While the gaseous fuels, CNG, LPG, LNG, water gas, biogas, coal gas, etc., these can be the examples under the gaseous fuels. So with this, we'll proceed further the very important topic, and that is calorific value. So as far as calorific value is concerned, what is meant by calorific value? That we should know. So calorific value is very easy, and it will be very easy to remember also. I will give you some shortcut how to remember the concept of calorific value. We know that what is meant by fuel? Fuels are nothing but the materials which are producing heat. It means heat is being produced, that is called as the fuel. Okay, on combustion, if heat is being produced, that material is said to be fuel. It means how much heat is produced, that we should find out, and that is called as the calorific value. It means calorific value means what? How much heat or how much energy is released by combustion of fuel. It means we can say the quantity of heat, okay, quantity or amount of heat which is released during the combustion of fuel, that is called as calorific value. The calorific values are of two types. One is called as gross calorific value, which is called short form as GCV, and it is also called as higher calorific value, which can be called as HCV. It means this GCV is the gross calorific value, while it is also called as HCV, that is higher calorific value. Okay, and this is NCV, which is called as net calorific value, which is also called as lower calorific value. So higher calorific value and lower calorific value, but mainly it is termed as gross calorific value and net calorific value. These are just the alternative words. Okay, these are alternative words. Okay, so what happens? The basic reason, main reason behind the concept of GCV and NCV is, you know that some fuels, or we can say almost all the fuels, contain hydrogen. Hydrocarbons are there. So if hydrogen is present, what will happen? Okay, if hydrogen is present, then this hydrogen and oxygen will combine together, or it means react together during combustion reaction, and there is formation of water. Okay, this water is evaporated in the form of water vapor, and that is escaped with in the atmosphere with some heat. It means as water is at high temperature, suppose it is in the vapor phase, so these water vapors are being escaped into atmosphere, and that are carrying away some heat. Some heat which is produced, that heat is being wasted. Water vapors are taking away some heat. So how much heat is being taken away by that water? If we collect that heat, if we could collect that water vapors, and if you condense them, and if you cool it, and if you are getting that heat also, then that total heat is called as gross calorific value. It means the heat which is generated by combustion, direct combustion of fuel, as well as if we are getting some more heat which was being lost, which was getting escaped. So in this way, whatever the escaping amount is there, or whatever the heat is being lost, that heat can be collected. And it means if you could collect that heat, if you cool that water vapors to room temperature, or we can say 15 degrees Celsius temperature, suppose water is at high 100 degrees Celsius temperature, and if you are cooling it to 15 degrees Celsius, then during that cooling, we can get that heat. Okay, if it is possible, then that heat plus direct heat, the total heat is called as gross calorific value. But is it practically possible? The answer is no, it is not possible practically, right? So as the definition of gross calorific value is the total. Now I will tell you a shortcut that you know the definition for calorific value. Okay, what was the definition of calorific value? That amount of heat liberated. But if you have to write it in proper words, what we can write? The amount of heat, I'm talking about calorific value only. The amount of heat liberated by burning or combustion of fuel. How much fuel? Unit mass or unit volume of fuel. At what condition? At STP condition. In presence of oxygen or in presence of air. Okay, so these things can be elaborated. Now, when we have to talk about the calorific value, I will tell you what to do. A shortcut is there. If you remember the definition of calorific value, okay, if we see the calorific value, it means whenever we are talking about calorific value, so whatever the definition of calorific value is there, that is to be copy pasted in writing the GCV. It means when you have to write about GCV, gross calorific value, we have to copy this definition of calorific value. Okay, dash 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 dash, and we have to write and then we have to write some sentence. Similarly, when we have to write the definition for not net calorific value, again we have to copy the definition of calorific value, and then some part is to be written. All right. So what is there and what part is to be written? So that we'll see. So I will tell you in short. If you are saying that calorific value is the amount of heat liberated during combustion of fuel by burning or combustion of unit mass or unit volume of fuel at STP in presence of oxygen, and the products of combustion are cooled to 15 degrees Celsius, and that heat is also collected. It means we are getting this heat plus this heat, and that's why this is the total heat, and that's why it is gross calorific value or higher calorific value, the amount of heat liberated by combustion of 1 unit mass or unit volume of fuel in presence of oxygen at STP condition, and products of combustion are cooled to 15 degrees Celsius. Cooled to 15 degrees Celsius. And that heat is also collected. But in actual practice, is it possible? If you are burning some fuel and some water vapors are being escaped in the atmosphere, can we collect that? Can we see that water vapors? You cannot see. You cannot see, and you cannot. It is very difficult to collect it also. It means it is very difficult to collect that water vapors. So, if it is not possible to collect that water vapors, then practically we are not collecting and cooling it. So, practically what we are doing, we are getting less amount of heat than expected. Expected amount of heat was this GCV, but we are getting less amount of heat because some product of heat is wasted. So here we have to write this definition is to be copy pasted here, and products of combustion are allowed to escape. Are allowed to escape in the atmosphere. It means we are not collecting these water vapors. So thus we are getting less calorific value than expected, and it is called as the net calorific value. Okay. I will give you a simple example for this calorific value. Let us compare between the calorific value, gross calorific value and net calorific value. One simple example that will make it clear. Actually, I should write NCV. Net calorific value, gross calorific value and net calorific value. Okay. So let us consider your parents or some of your relatives are working somewhere in office. So when they are getting salary, what they get, okay, just tell me what they get. They get basic pay, then dearness allowance, Mahagai Bhatta, okay, dearness pay, etc. Then HRA, house rental allowance, traveling allowance, and so many allowances are there. So if you see, all the addition of all these basic DA, DP, HR, and much more thing, all the allowances, traveling allowance, etc., that becomes a huge figure, or we can say bigger figure. Okay, this becomes a bigger figure due to addition of these. But are you getting the total amount of that salary? No, because there are some deductions also. So what are the deductions? Okay, so here I will write some deductions. So what are the deductions? Sometimes you are having, you have to pay income tax, you have to pay professional tax, you may have some policies, okay, LIC and etc. That policies you may have, or we can have sometimes charges for canteen, charges for something else. So in this way, some charges may be deducted here, and in actual hand, you are getting less salary than whatever expected here. So as a gross calorific value, it is expected that you should get the total salary, but in actual hand, we are getting less salary. So this is lesser amount or less amount. So whatever you get here, this is the net calorific value. That is net salary. In terms of salary, if you speak, this is net salary and this is the gross salary. I hope it is clear to you. Let us proceed to the next part as this concept is clear. There is one relation between this GCV and NCV. You should remember this equation or this formula, that GCV is equal to NCV plus 0.09 into H into latent heat of water or steam. Just I have rearranged this equation. You know, GCV is equal to NCV plus this, or equal to NCV is equal to GCV minus this. This is the higher one and this is lower one. So you have to remember this formula, and some basic or fundamental numericals can be asked on this formula also, which is very easy. Remember that here the mistake which is being made, suppose 5% hydrogen is present. So sometimes you do mistake, as you may write it as 5 upon 100. Remember that this is not to be done. You have to directly put the value as 5%. So 5 value is to be considered. If there is a 5%, then that 5 value is to be considered as it is. that is to be written as it is. As it is, the value of percentage hydrogen content that is to be taken. A latent heat of water is 587 calorie per gram. If it is given, you can take the given value. Otherwise, you have to remember this value in the unit of calorie per gram. Okay. Then with this basic or fundamental terms of we can say net calorific value. Just proceed further. Yes, this is also a very important part, and that is units of calorific value. Now, as we are talking about the units of calorific value, you should remember the CGS system, MKS system, and SI system. Many times we require SI system. So these are the simple units for the solid and liquid fuels, and these are for gaseous fuels. So you must remember in CGS system, it is calorie per gram, while it is calorie per liter. It is kilocalorie per kilogram. It means it is this and this is same. Here calorie per gram and here kilocalorie per gram multiplied by K divided by K. K stands for kilo. So it is again the same. But while writing the unit, we should write it as kilocalorie per kilogram. And here it is kilocalorie per meter cube. Okay. And in SI system, it is joules per kilogram, while it is joules per meter cube. So in this way, these are the units for calorific value of various fuels. Now we have to see very, very important point, very simple point, but still it is, though it is easy, but some terms may be confusing. So let us see the characteristics of good fuel. Suppose I ask you what are the characteristics of ideal student. You can mention some qualities of ideal student. Who are, which categories can be called as ideal categories for student. Similarly, as we are talking about the fuel, what do you expect? What are the characteristics of good fuel or ideal fuel? Be confident.
Combustible.
It should be completely combustible. So complete combustion is required. Correct. Again, yes. Akanksha Patil says, Akshata Patil, sorry, says high calorific value. Yes, high calorific value should be very high. Right? Again, somebody else. You just quote some properties. Easily available. फुटाफुटावरती पेट्रोल पंप पाहिजेत ना. नाहीतर 200 किलोमीटरला एक पेट्रोल पंप असेल तर चालेल का? अजिबात चालणार नाही. Okay. It should be cheap. It should be very cheap. It should be easily available. And it should be easy to transport. It should contain low moisture content. It means low moisture, ash, volatile matter should be present, or it should not be present in much quantity. Yes, Preeti madam. No harmful substances should be formed. Okay. Because if there is a formation of, if there is incomplete combustion, there is formation of some harmful pollutants like carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Also, though carbon dioxide is not harmful, or we can say poisonous pollutant, it is responsible for global warming. But the carbon monoxide is very, very harmful. It is poisonous, and that are forming due to incomplete combustion. So pollutants should not be released. That is expected. Availability of source. It means it should be easily available. No pollution should be there. Okay. Volatile matter, ash and moisture content should be low. As much low as possible. Okay. So let us, I will ask you some points. What about, you say that calorific value should be high. What about the ignition temperature? Before proceeding, I would like to ask you the ignition temperature. Whether the ignition temperature should be low or more. Yes, it is moderate. The reason. Okay, very good. A good fuel should have moderate ignition temperature. The reason is, if the, I will compare the three one in just brief. If you have to talk about the solid fuels, suppose you have to burn some wood. It may not be possible with the help of some matchstick only. Okay, if the bigger part of wood is there, then it may not be possible to burn it with the help of matchstick. But if you talk about the liquid fuels, if you are burning the liquid fuels, for example, in kerosene stove, then matchstick is sufficient to ignite that liquid fuel. And in case of gaseous fuels, does matchstick required? No. Even a spark of lighter is also sufficient to ignite that. Even we know that sometimes if there is a leakage of LPG gas in our home, or anywhere, then even a spark of light, we can say electricity button, when we are putting it on or off, that is also sufficient to burn the entire room or ignite ignition. So what is desirable? If the ignition temperature or ignition point is very, very low, like gaseous fuels, it is also not good. It is risky. And for solid fuels, it is also very high. So it is also not beneficial. So expected that it should be moderate, like liquid fuels. Okay. So let us proceed. It should have high calorific value. Now we'll just be fast here. Calorific value should be high. Ignition temperature should be moderate. Moisture content should be lower. Non-combustible matter, it means the ash content should be in small quantity. Non-combustible matter is the matter which remains in the form of ash after combustion. Actually, that is the part of material which is present in the fuel which doesn't undergo combustion. So it should be less. The volatile matter also should be less. The velocity of combustion should be moderate. And we can say that should be controllable. Okay. I will write here moderate and controllable. Okay. Moderate plus controllable. It means we should be able to control the velocity of combustion. So it should have moderate and controllable velocity of combustion. The products of combustion should not be harmful. Okay. There should not be formation of any pollutants. It should be of low cost, easy to transport. Combustion should be easily controllable, just we have discussed. It should not undergo spontaneous process or spontaneous combustion. Whenever we require, that time it should only undergo the combustion. The storage cost should be low. Storage should be easy to store and transport. Okay. And the cost is also expected to be low. It should burn in minimum or without much smoke. In case of solid fuels, the size should be uniform. Uniform size is expected in case of solid fuels. Now we have to see the analysis of coal. Okay, so we have to proceed for the analysis of coal. But before proceeding to the analysis of coal, we should know the coal and what is meant by coal or what are the types of coal. So let us proceed to the coal. If you see the structure of coal, it is containing some hexagonal and pentagonal rings. Some hexagonal and pentagonal rings are present in the coal. And if you see the structure, there are various groups as we can say substituents. It may be CH3 group, it may be COH group. So various groups are attached to the hexagonal and pentagonal rings. And suppose I am showing the structure in this way. Suppose here the structure can be there. So all these are the hexagonal and pentagonal rings. Okay. So sometimes it is observed that there are some cavities. So within these cavities, suppose here the cavity is present. Within these cavities, some minerals and some ions may be attached. Some minerals and ions may be present. Okay. So that are acting as impurities. Sometimes gases can also be passing inside that we can say the regions, or we can say gases can also be entrapped. Gases can adsorb on the coal. Okay. So with this, we'll see the types of coal. Okay. So we have to see the types of coal. There are 4 types of coal. Okay. The first is peat, then lignite, bituminous. Okay. Bituminous and anthracite. Peat, lignite, bituminous, and anthracite are the 4 types of coal. You can, you may know that there are again 3 subtypes here: bituminous, subbituminous, and semi-bituminous type of coals also. Now, we have to mainly remember that what happens when we are going from left to right or from peat to anthracite. When peat is the first type of coal and when you are moving to the anthracite, during this journey, what happens? So during this journey, there is increase in some of the properties and some of the properties are decreasing. So which properties are increasing? If you remember, the carbon percent increases. Percentage of carbon increases from peat, lignite, bituminous, and anthracite. It means more carbon percentage will be observed in lignite than the peat. Then more amount of carbon in anthracite as compared to bituminous, lignite, and peat. So carbon percentage will be more when we are going from left to right. Okay. So these are the increasing properties from first to second, we can say fourth part of, or we can say type of coal. Then there is increase in, if carbon is increasing, then calorific value will increase. If carbon is increasing, then the hardness will also increase. The coal will become hard and hard. The hardness of coal will increase. Due to increase in carbon percentage, black color will increase. Intensity of black color. Okay. We can say intensity of black color. You know that black color is having some shine. If there is a very, very dark and dark color, dark black color, then it can shine like metal. So intensity of black color, we can say. Intensity of black color will increase. COLOUR. Okay. Then we can say luster will also increase. So these are the properties which are increasing from left to right. And there are certain properties which are decreasing also. So we'll see what are the decreasing properties. It means in only these two lines, we will cover the entire part. I will take some different color so that it will be easy to compare. Okay, so which are the various properties which are decreasing from P to anthracite, that is from left to right, and that decreasing properties are percentage of hydrogen, percentage of nitrogen, then sulfur, then ash, moisture, these are the values which are decreasing from left to right. Ash, moisture, volatile matter, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur percentage, that may decrease from left to right. So what happens? Can you tell me which of this coal is said to be best coal? Which is the best coal out of these four? Yes, come on. So anthracite will be the best coal because it contains more maximum content of carbon, and that's why calorific value, and it has minimum content of ash, moisture, and volatile matter. It means you have to remember these things which are increasing properties and which are decreasing properties, so that you can easily explain any question, or you can easily solve any question based on these relativity. Okay, just remember the sequence: peat, lignite, bituminous, and then anthracite. Anthracite is very good quality coal and it is used in industrial applications. Okay, industrial applications मध्ये वापरला जातो. Okay, so let us proceed further with the analysis of coal. So you know that there are two types of analysis. One is called as proximate analysis and other is called as ultimate analysis. So what is meant by proximate and ultimate analysis, that we'll see. The analysis in which the moisture, volatile matter, ash, and fixed carbon is determined, that is called as proximate analysis. While the analysis in which we are determining the carbon and hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, ash, and oxygen, that is called as ultimate analysis. Okay, so basic reason why coal analysis is required. The analysis of coal is required because we should know the quality of coal before using or before usage. It means if you are, or we can say, we have to calculate the certain requirement for, it means for a certain application you need some coal amount. So how much coal is required? 5 kilogram, 10 kilogram, or whatever it is. So it will be based on the quality of that coal, and then you can calculate that that much coal amount will be required, and that's why this analysis of coal is we can say important. So here I will be taking it fast, but both the videos are available on our channel as in detail the unit. Okay, so the fundamental part in if you see the we can say proximate analysis. So if you are talking about proximate analysis, there are mainly three things. We have to determine moisture, then volatile matter, and then ash. How to determine moisture? So we know that the coal sample is to be taken in crucible, that is to be heated in the muffle furnace or oven, take it out, cool it and weigh it. Process over for all. The process is same for all. काय करायचंय? Heat it, take it out, cool it and take the weight. So what is the main thing, and what are the possible questions? How much heating or at what temperature heating is required, and at what time it is required. So for moisture content, the heating is required at 110 degrees Celsius and the timing is half an hour or 1 hour. Bola. 1 hour or half an hour. Okay. Sanga lokar. It is to you. Volatile matter. It is to be heated to the temperature of 925 degrees Celsius at the time of 7 minutes. Ash. When ash is to be calculated or determined, then the fuel is to be burnt completely at 750 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, for half an hour. Okay. So when we remember this timing and temperatures, these will be the basic questions which will be asked on the moisture, or we can say this approximate analysis. And the next thing, what is remembered, what is necessary to remember, and it is formula or all the formulae. So let us proceed. We'll see it in detail. Okay. Here you should remember it as 1 hour. Okay. Remember that whatever the temperatures I have mentioned, first temperature was 110 degrees Celsius, second was 925 degrees Celsius, and then the last was 750 degrees Celsius. So here plus minus 5 degrees Celsius is okay. Here plus minus 25 degrees Celsius is okay. Degrees Celsius, and here also plus minus 25 degrees Celsius. Okay. So that can be the temperatures. Now the main thing here is to remember the formula. As here we are heating the coal sample for removing the moisture, and moisture can be removed for this temperature. So here the moisture percent is equal to loss in weight due to moisture. It means when we are heating to the 110 degrees Celsius, at that time whatever the loss in weight is observed, that loss in weight is there, divided by initial weight of coal sample multiplied by 100. Still, if you want to more clear, we have written another form of equation also. Either this or either this form you can use, and this will be important part for the numericals also. So m minus m1. M is the initial weight of coal sample, and m1 is the weight of coal sample after heating to 110 degrees Celsius. M is initial, and this is, we can say, not final, but after 110 degrees Celsius. Okay. This is the weight of coal sample after heating to 110 degrees Celsius. So this weight will be more, initial weight will be more because there is a loss in weight. So m minus m1 divided by m and multiplied by 100 for percentage, we are getting the moisture percentage. Okay, that is simple. The next is, okay, this is the cooling system. This is the crucible. Okay, this is the silica crucible. Internal box chart मध्ये एका दिसते. So this is silica crucible in which we are taking the fuel for burning or coal for burning or heating, and this crucible is being kept in the desiccator. So this glass assembly, external glass assembly, is the desiccator. Desiccator. It is just a cooling system. At the bottom, it contains calcium chloride, anhydrous calcium chloride. It means if any moisture is present, then that moisture is absorbed by this calcium chloride, which is present at the bottom of this desiccator. Okay. So we have to proceed further to the next part as volatile matter from the proximate analysis. Now, there are two ways by which we can find out the volatile matter. Either we can take upper sample, it means moisture free coal sample, because we have removed the moisture. So we can take the coal sample from the above step. That is one option. And second method is we can take fresh coal sample. We have to take fresh coal sample which is moisture, which is not moisture free. It means two options are, one is moisture free coal sample from the above step, and other is fresh coal sample of same type which may contain moisture. So both are to be heated at same temperature, same timing. Then there will be removal of this volatile matter. But remember that this lid is to be covered here in this case. Otherwise, the coal will burn. If the lid is closed, the coal will not burn. Then this time the loss in weight is due to volatile matter only. And loss in weight due to volatile matter upon initial weight of coal multiplied by 100. That is the formula. So here, this weight is M1 because we are hitting from M1 to M2 now. We are getting M1 to M2, but divided by it is M, not M1. Remember this. You make the mistake here. You are writing M1 here, but which will be wrong. Why it is to be not written as M1? Because this M1 is not the very initial weight. Very initial weight is only M, which you have taken at the starting. That contains some moisture, that contains some volatile matter, and that contains some ash also. So here we must consider M as very initial weight of coal sample, not M1 or M2. Okay, so this is step 1. Step B is air dried coal, which may contain moisture, that is directly heated without removing the moisture, and this time the loss in weight will be due to volatile matter and moisture both. Here we are getting this formula upon initial weight of coal sample multiplied by 100, but we have to subtract moisture percentage because we require only volatile matter here. Percentage of volatile matter is required here only, so we have to subtract moisture percentage from this so as to have correct reading.
It can be written as M minus M dash upon M into 100 upon moisture percentage, where M is very initial weight of coal sample, M dash is weight of coal sample after heating directly at 925 degrees Celsius. So in this way, we can calculate the volatile matter by using this second method.
The next is ash. For ash content, the coal sample is to be burned by open crucible at the temperature of 750 degrees Celsius. This is not the loss in weight because we require ash only, and ash is the final amount of material which is remaining there. So whatever the amount of material is remaining finally, that is called as ash. And so ash is equal to weight of ash percentage equal to weight of ash upon initial weight of coal multiplied by 100. So we can say simply M3 upon M into 100. And the most important, which we should not skip and forget, the fixed carbon percentage is equal to 100 minus all above things, that is moisture, volatile matter, and ash. All these are to be added, or we can say these are to be subtracted from 100, and we are getting the fixed carbon percentage. Now, one more important thing which is required here, that the significance or importance of this proximate analysis, which means what is the role of moisture and these things. It means what is expected. The moisture should be present in less quantity, that is expected. Volatile matter also should be present in less quantity. Ash should be present in less quantity, and fixed carbon should be present in maximum quantity, in more quantity, so as to have better quality coal. If this is there, then it means if fixed carbon percentage is more, then the coal is said to be best coal or a quality coal, we can say. Okay, so this is the importance of, we can say, proximate analysis. Now the next is ultimate analysis. In ultimate analysis, we are determining the coal sample for carbon, hydrogen, sulfur, nitrogen, ash, and oxygen. So we'll see it step by step. Carbon and hydrogen, that is by combustion method, and you know that here there is such a combustion chamber. Okay, so whatever the carbon coal sample you have taken here, that coal will convert into carbon dioxide and H2O vapors, because if carbon is there, the carbon will convert into CO2, hydrogen will convert into H2O. These vapors are allowed to pass through these U-tubes. Okay, through these U-tubes, this will pass. They contain, the first U-tube contains calcium chloride, anhydrous calcium chloride, or magnesium perchlorate, either of these two. And the second U-tube contains KOH solution. So this is U-shaped tube. So the first U-tube will absorb water vapors, and second U-tube will absorb the KOH solution. That you have to write, and that you have to remember properly. Otherwise, you make a mistake or there is a confusion which material or CO2 is absorbed in which tube. So that is to be remembered, and such type of reactions are there. It means if carbon and oxygen is forming carbon dioxide, that carbon dioxide is absorbed in the KOH U-tube. So here the potassium hydroxide and CO2, K2CO3 is formed, and here in the first U-tube there is formation of hydrogen into water, and these water vapors are absorbed by calcium chloride, and there is formation of heptahydrate calcium chloride. Okay. So we have to see the formulae. The formulae are very important. So the formula are the percentage of carbon equal to weight of CO2 formed upon initial weight of coal sample multiplied by. Now, this is very easy to remember. Why this 12 upon 44? 12 is the mass of carbon in CO2 molecule. Okay. 12 is the mass of carbon in CO2 molecule and 44 is the mass of entire CO2 molecule. Multiplied by 100 for percentage. Similarly, weight of water formed for hydrogen percentage equal to 2 upon 18. Why 2? Because mass of hydrogen in water is 2 gram and the entire water is 18 gram multiplied by 100. That's it. It is so simple to remember the formula. So next method is sulfur. Determination of sulfur by ESCA method. Which method? ESCA method. Sometimes this can also be asked, that sulfur is determined by dash method. So for that, what we have to do, as we know, we are using bomb calorimeter, or actually it is not for your syllabus probably. The determination of calorific value for solid and liquid fuels by using bomb calorimeter. So at the bottom of bomb calorimeter, there is formation of some sulfur dioxide and sulfur trioxide into sulfuric acid. It means there is formation of sulfuric acid like gases or HNO3 type of gases at the bottom of bomb pot. So this sulfuric acid type of gas H2SO, there is formation of SO2 and SO3 and which is passed into water, and that's why it becomes H2SO4. Okay, liquid H2SO4. So H2SO4 is taken and barium chloride reagent is added in that, so that there is formation of barium sulfate. And this barium sulfate is precipitate is taken, its weight is found out, and the formula is there. What formula? Weight of barium sulfate form. Weight of barium sulfate form multiplied by 32 upon 33. Kiti 33? 233. In this way, we can remember the formula. 32 upon 233. This is the regular one. Weight of barium sulfate form upon initial weight of coal sample taken. Here, why 32? Because the mass of sulfur in this molecule is 32 and the entire mass of this barium sulfate is 233. You have to just remember barium sulfate 33, 233 multiplied by 100 for percentage. Nitrogen. Actually, this nitrogen is considered to be difficult methods for understanding. So I will tell you, focus it properly. This is the Gelder's flask in which we have to take nitrogen containing coal sample. And what will happen? The nitrogen from coal will react with H2SO4 and K2SO4 as catalyst. H2SO4 is added, concentrated H2SO4 is added, and potassium sulfate is used as catalyst here. So when there is an addition of potassium sulfate as catalyst, there is formation of ammonium sulfate, NH4 twice SO4. So this ammonium sulfate is formed, then that is passed into this, okay, pass into this, that is heated in presence of alkali, and then there is a liberation of ammonia gas. So here there is a liberation of ammonia gas, and you can see the liberated ammonia will pass into this tube, and that will pass, and that will be bubbled into large quantity of standard acid solution. Here also, this is showing in the diagrammatic view, and this is a flow diagram, or you can say flow chart. So this liberated ammonia is passed into large quantity of standard acid solution. Standard acid means whose concentration is known. And then how much acid was taken initially, that we should know, or that should be calculated, and that titration is called as blank titration. The first titration to find out how much quantity of acid is taken initially before starting this experiment, that is called as blank reading or blank titration. And when we are passing ammonia and then how much quantity of acid is remaining in this, that is called as main titration or back titration. Blank and back are also called as main titration. And then we can find out the remaining amount of acid, so that we require consumed amount of acid. We want to find out how much quantity of acid is consumed by ammonia. As ammonia is formed here, that ammonia is consuming some acid. So how much acid is consumed, that we should find, that we should know. So the formula is, we can say only one formula. The upper formula is sufficient. volume of acid consumed multiplied by normality of NaOH, where NaOH is used, here NaOH is used for back titration, okay, the titration with NaOH. Multiplied by 1.4 divided by weight of coal sample. Remember, don't multiply it with the 100 because this is the derived formula. Derivation is not for your syllabus and directly formula is required. So by doing all the calculations or these derivations, the formula is this only and no this multiplication is required. Okay. Okay. So this is the part where the formula is derived. Then the ash we know that it is derived by the same way as in proximate analysis and it is having same formula. So ash is calculated or determined by using same method. And the last is oxygen percentage. So how oxygen is determined? 100 minus carbon, hydrogen, sulfur, nitrogen and ash. All these amounts are to be taken. So its significance, it means what is the role of carbon, hydrogen, sulfur, nitrogen. So we know that if carbon is more, then it increases calorific value. It is expected that higher calorific value or higher carbon content is expected, but hydrogen, sulfur, nitrogen, dash that are decreasing calorific value, therefore that should be in the lower amount. Now the refining of petroleum. Actually, we have taken a lot of time on fuels. Actually, it was somewhat lengthy topic along with the numericals also. Okay, we'll proceed. We'll finish this. The only part remaining is refining of petroleum. So we know that petroleum is not petrol. Petroleum means crude oil. So purification, refining is nothing but a purification process by some steps. So the name petroleum means oil under rocks because petra means rocks and oleum means oil. So oil under dome-shaped rocks is nothing but the petroleum. In short, it is crude oil. So this is the very basic part which is not required, that what is petroleum and how it is formed. Petroleum is formed inside the earth crust due to buried animals or we can say plant debris in ancient years or many years ago. Okay, so the plant and animal debris or organic matter is converted into it is broken and it is converted into alkanes. Okay, and that are available in the form of petroleum. It means petroleum is nothing but the major quantity is in the form of alkanes. It is formed by anaerobic decay, anaerobic decomposition of animal and plant debris. Okay, and then what happens? These alkane molecules are having some cyclization or isomerization, and that are forming crude oil. It means the normal alkanes or straight chain alkanes are converted into branch alkanes, cycloalkanes, and something else. There will be some isomer formations, and the mixture of all these alkanes is nothing but the crude oil. So if you see the composition of crude oil, the mainly carbon and hydrogens are there. Some other elements are there, sulfur, nitrogen, and oxygen also possible, but they are very in small quantity. They are in very small quantity. The carbon and hydrogen is present in the maximum quantity. Carbon is 80 to 87% and hydrogen as well 11 to 13%. As it is elemental composition, some molecular composition is also there. It contains open chain alkanes, cycloalkanes, aromatic compounds, resins, and asphaltenes. Asphaltenes are polycondensed aromatic compounds. It means resins are polycondensed. Number of times the condensation occurs, and so such type of polycondensed aromatic compounds are there, and that are called as asphaltenes. So it is the basic part. This is not actual refining. This is only how the petroleum is there and how it is formed or what is petroleum. Now, the refining of petroleum is this, that there is some step and there is a requirement of some column. So, removal of water, removal of sulfur, and fractional distillation. Removal of water, removal of sulfur, and fractional distillation. These are the three steps which are required. So, we'll see it one by one. Remember that refining is the purification or separation of various components of crude oil on the basis of their boiling point differences. Boiling point, on the basis of difference in boiling point. So, we have to remember them. This has main point. Boiling point is important one. And then removal of water by Cottrell's process, removal of sulfur by addition of copper oxide, and fractional distillation by using such a fractionating column. This is called as fractionating column. You know about distillation. In 11th and 12th class, we have studied about distillation process. So it is fractional distillation, where the fractional distillation is used when the closer boiling points are there. When the two materials are having closer boiling points, at a time we are using fractional distillation. Okay. So this is the step by step. I can say I have told you in short, and I think that is sufficient. We'll mainly focus on the fractional distillation. So in the first step, Cottrell's process, water is to be removed. In sulfur removal, we need to add copper oxide. So what will happen? On addition of copper oxide, sulfur will be removed. It means if sulfur is present in the fuel, and if you are adding copper oxide, that happens as there is formation of copper sulfide and oxygen is released. Okay. Half O2 is released. In short, the copper sulfide is formed as a precipitate, and that can be separated from crude oil. The most important thing is fractional distillation. The principle is vapors of higher boiling point liquid get condensed first. Most important sentence. The vapors of higher boiling point liquid. The vapors of higher boiling point liquid condense first during this stepwise cooling, and we are getting the various fractions. Okay. So let us proceed. This is the fractionating column. The construction of this, it is very, very huge cylindrical column. This is around 30 meter in height. Foot 9 meter, 30 meter in height, very huge. You know how much 1 meter is. Okay. So this is 30 meter in height, very huge column. 3 meter in diameter. This diameter is also very high, very huge diameter. And that's why it is having 50 to 60 compartments, or we can say, which are at about half meter distance, all of which we cannot show in the diagram. So it is about the construction part. It contains some bubble cups and bubble caps. What is bubble cup and bubble cap? Suppose you can see here, you can see that whatever the part you can see here. So this is considered to be bubble cup.
And this lid like part is bubble cap.
So I will explain you the working or the procedure. The crude oil is heated at a temperature of 400 to 450 degrees Celsius from the furnace, not muffle furnace, with the help of some furnace. And then the vapors are allowed to pass through this, we can say, huge fractionating column. When these are passing through this column, at that time, they will try to go up and up, up and up. Somewhere they get condensed and there is formation of liquid. Some will go up and up. They will able to reach in the upper part. Okay. So it may be possible that they may reach in the upper part. Sometimes they may not reach in the upper part. They may condense somewhere. And from the respective compartments, for example, one is getting condensed here. So that is taken out. So from the various compartments that are taken out, and it is found that, oh, it is heavy oil, this is heavy diesel, this is kerosene, and etc. It means the one which is having higher boiling point, then it is at the lower compartment, that is deposited or that is condensed in the lower compartment, because we are going from high temperature to low temperature. While if a material is having lower temperature, we can say if the component is having lower temperature, that can go up and up. It means that will not get cooled easily, and some of them may get escape from the top in the form of uncondensed gases also. We should remember that the working, that is higher boiling point liquid get condensed first. This is the important point. It means the upper particles, or we can say upper material, that are having lower boiling points, and lower one are having higher boiling points. So I will give you a table. Okay, these are some applications of various components. The uncondensed gases in LPG, aviation fuel, as petroleum ether in aeroplanes, petrol as gasoline in, you can say. So you know these applications. So we'll see this table. This is the table. You can take the screenshot of this table, and there the boiling point and composition and uses are given, which are very easy. It means here what you require to remember, you require to remember the boiling point range. So it is very easy. You must remember this in sequence. either from bottom or from top. So I'm remembering it from bottom. Suppose I feel it easy. Heavy oil, diesel, kerosene, naphtha, petrol or gasoline, then aviation fuel and uncondensed gases. So their boiling points are, this is having below 40, then 40 to 70, 60 to 120, 120 to 180, 180 to 250, 250 to 320, 320 to 400. It means what is the main thing? You must remember these things in sequence so that these boiling points can be easily remembered. And here the composition also, if required, C1 to C4, C5 to C7, but the compositions are not much required. Yes, they may be required, but more importance will be given to the boiling points and these respective fractions. So these are the fundamental things that we can say the uses for respective boiling fraction, or we can say petroleum refining fractions. Okay, so in this way, the fuel part is over. The next part is lubricants. So the lubricants, what are lubricants and why they are required? So you know the basic things, and it is the basic requirement. So these lubricants are very, very required to reduce the friction or to minimize the friction. So the introduction, in that introduction, we have to see what is meant by lubrication. So lubrication, the process to reduce the frictional force between the sliding and rubbing surfaces of metal is called as lubrication. And the material which is used for that, it is called as lubricant. Okay, it is a substance or that is a material. So process is lubrication and that material is called as lubricant. So this is very much important to minimize the friction. So we will not go into much details about the friction, though I was having some material prepared here in the for friction. We can say the frictional friction is taking place. So there is energy loss and etc. So these are some of the functions of lubricant. It reduces frictional resistance. If lubricants are used, then the friction will decrease, frictional resistance will decrease. It reduces surface deformation and wear and tear resistance also. It means by using this, or we can say deformation, how it is possible, it reduces surface deformation and wear and tear by keeping the moving surfaces apart. Whatever the moving surfaces are there, suppose the wheel is there, so wheel and the other moving surface that are kept slightly apart by use of this lubricant. Okay, they avoid seizure of moving parts. It means as the use of lubricants is there, that will minimize the liberation of frictional heat, and the heat will not produce there. So that will be a better thing. It increases efficiency of machine. It reduces maintenance cost of machines and increases their life. It also acts as sealant for the gases. Okay, it acts as a sealant. Then lubricants prevent the corrosion and rust. They reduce noise of the machine in which where it is used. The lubricant or lubricating oil absorbs the generated heat, and that's why it also acting as a coolant. The lubricant circulation system carry away debris and contaminants that get introduced into the system. As far as the classification is concerned, there are some types of lubricants. There are 3 types: liquid or lubricating oils, semi-solid lubricants or greases, and solid lubricants. So let us proceed further. So the liquid lubricants or lubricating oils are again subdivided into 3 categories as animal and vegetable oils, mineral oils and petroleum oils, blended oils, doped oils, or compound oils. So here the animal or vegetable oils can be having these parameters. This can be extracted from animal and vegetable matter, and they contain glycerides of higher fatty acids. They stick to the metal surface even under high temperature and high load. So it is a good thing. But if you have, if you know, see, there are certain limitations also. They are expensive. They undergo oxidation to form gummy and acidic products. So acidic products may be formed. They become more and more thick, and they can hydrolyze in presence of moisture. So these are some limitations. Therefore, these are rarely used. Okay. Some examples can be the castor oil, palm oil, mustard oil, olive oil, etc. The next is mineral oils or petroleum oils. These are obtained by fractional distillation. Recently, we have seen the fractionating column and fractional distillation. So these can be used from the lower part, heavy oil. Okay, so that residual parts can be used from the steam distillation, or sorry, the distillation, fractional distillation or vacuum distillation. The higher hydrocarbon chain may be present, the carbon 12 to carbon 50 may be possible. So these are widely used lubricants because they are cheap, abundant, and stable at most of the working conditions. And even they are not readily hydrolyzed. So it is better to use these type of materials. The next one is blended oils. Blended oils, it means some blending can be done. Some oils can be taken in the compounding. It means they are blended. Something is added into that to increase some of the properties, and that is said to be blending. The different additives which are added that are in this way: the antioxidants, oiliness carriers, viscosity index improvers, dispersants, metal deactivators, etc. So this can be added. The second type is semi-solid lubricants or greases. So as the name implies, they are solid or semi-solid in the form of grease, or they are grease-like. If you see the table, then basic ingredients of grease, you see lubricating oil, some thickener is to be added, some thickeners are required, and these are the additives. So in petroleum oil, we can add some thickener as soap of lithium, sodium, barium, calcium, and aluminum. And these additives will be there: anti-wear, antioxidant, rust, and corrosion resistance, viscosity index improvers. So that can be added. The preparation of grease, higher fatty acids are converted into soap, and then that can be converted into grease. So these are some of the types of greases. Just take a screenshot. Chemical composition, the type of grease, and the characteristic properties. The applications of grease. The greases are generally used in textile mills, paper mills, and mills of edible articles, where use of liquid lubricants can cause contamination of the products by spilling or dripping. It means where the contamination is occurring, spilling occurs, in that case, such type of greases can be used. The machines like rail axle boxes work at slow speed and high pressure. This operation and sudden jerks. In such conditions, oil cannot remain in its place. So that's why the greases are to be used. In bearing and gears working at high temperatures, we know that even cycle or motorcycle or any bearing is there, then the grease is applied to many bearings and gears. It is used in bearings which need to be sealed against the entry of dust, grit, and moisture. As there are some applications or advantages of greases, some limitations are also there. So the coefficient of friction is higher sometimes as compared to lubricating oils. The greases cannot dissipate heat effectively. The greases cannot be used in the presence of water because the fiber structure and thickness that are adversely affected by water, and the grease will undergo degradation in that case. So water and grease is not to be used. Or where water possibility is there, where leakages of water or such possibility is there, then grease cannot be useful. Then the last is solid lubricants. Solid lubricants are used where the liquid or semi-liquid lubricants cannot be useful, or they are fail to give good results or satisfactory results. The best, or we can say the most common solid lubricants are graphite and molybdenum disulfide. So graphite and molybdenum disulfides are mainly used because of their weak van der Waals forces and better structures. So you know that about the graphite. Graphite is having sp2 hybridization. Actually, it is not much important. But if you see that graphite is having layer structure. We are learning graphite from school levels. Graphite is having layer structure, and due to the multiple layers, and one more thing, there is a very larger gap between the layers. So 3.4 angstrom unit as compared to the bond length of carbon-carbon in graphite. This particular distance is double than the bond length. So these layers are slippery over one another, and that's why this graphite is soft, and that can be used as a we can say solid lubricant material. Similarly, the molybdenum disulfide is there. It is also having a sandwich-like layer, sandwich-like or layer-like structure in which molybdenum atoms which are present between the two sulfur layers. It shows a shear strength in a direction parallel to the layers due to poor interlaminar structure. Laminar structure means layer structure. It has lower coefficient of friction and it is stable in air up to 400 degrees Celsius. So this is also an excellent lubricant in vacuum. Therefore, it can be useful in space. Okay, space vehicles especially. These are some properties of lubricants as viscosity. Lubricants are highly viscous. They flow very slowly. Okay. Viscosity index, actually viscosity index is nothing but it is an empirical scale which is used to measure the change of viscosity of oil with temperature. We know that if high temperature is there, then the viscosity of oil may change. Viscosity decreases at high temperature because that particles get separated from each other and the fluidity increases. Okay, or we can say viscosity decreases. The viscosity index is defined as the average decrease in viscosity of oil per degree rise of temperature between 100 Fahrenheit and 210 Fahrenheit. So we can say if there is increase in temperature, there is a decrease in viscosity. So if the viscosity of lubricant decreases fastly with the rise in temperature, it is said to have low viscosity index. Otherwise, it will have high viscosity index. Flash point and fire point. So flash point is the minimum temperature at which oil vapor and air mixture ignites for a moment. For some time that gets ignited and producing a spark when a small flame is brought near it. So fire point is the minimum temperature at which vapors of the oil burn continuously for at least 5 seconds when a small flame is brought near the material or near it. So generally a fire point is 5 to 40 degrees Celsius higher than the flash point. Flash point is just flash start. Okay, and it can be further point as fire point. So flash and fire point can be determined with the help of some apparatus known as Penske-Moreton apparatus. The chemical properties are there, that acidity and saponification, and you just go through this saponification and acidity concept. That's it for today. I think we should stop. If you want to ask any doubt, you can ask. Okay, so I think we should stop today. It was a long lecture and thank you for your patience. Okay, so see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Have a good day.